It's no longer about liberty, ethnicity, or freedom. Foe integuments veil the somatic incisions that sculpt the faces of nations. Memes, cultures, zeitgeist, and the deconstruction of ipseity all work in conjunction to produce the self-imposed dichotomies with which enmity is derived. Eye against eye, actuality versus perception, memory or dream. Individuals fail to form distinctions between friend and foe when the world is delineated in binary terms. Emotion control, battlefield control, everything is monitored and kept under control. Empathy suppression, guilt suppression, responsibility for acts of violence subtly heaved upon ill-conceived notions of righteousness. While bathing in the blood of enemies, solace can only be found in the concept of justice. Abhorrent acts in and of themselves are insignificant on the psyche of a tool. Empathy, ideologies, and contempt are all foreign concepts to them. They made their choice. They sealed their fate. And I'm
just the Reaper.
Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance follows the story of tragic hero-turned-cyborg ninja Raiden 4 years after the fall of the Patriots. Still reeling from the psychological trauma of his past experiences as a child soldier and a tool of the Patriots, Raiden finds himself amidst a vast government conspiracy scripted with the blood of innocent children and punctuated with the collapse of civilization in its current form. While Rising weaves an intriguing, if not somewhat surreal and desultory tale, it must be said that the vast majority of the story must be actively sought out by the player through codec conversations. The plot can be disjointed if you aren't constantly calling your comrades to see if they have anything to say about the quandaries that Raiden is assiduously confronted with. While the story isn't on par with the Metal Gear Solid series, it's still strong enough to warrant deconstruction due in large part to the moral dilemmas proposed that Raiden can't seem to come to terms with. However, even in the midst of some truly haunting and morose plot points, the writers kept the story light enough so as not to completely overwhelm players with a sense of dread and despair. There are plenty of Easter eggs, one-liners, and jokes strewn about Rising's plot. Though very unlike the Solid series, they're sometimes abrupt and feel completely out of place in the situations that they're found in. All in all, the plot is far more involved and nuanced than it initially seems. However, it still fails to live up to the cathartic experiences that the Solid series provided. Nonetheless, this is a spin-off title, and naturally the paradigm has shifted from philosophical aphorisms about the cost of war to more indulgent yet cleverly constructed axioms about the clashing ideologies within individuals. Consequently, the gameplay mirrors the focal shift in theme through fast, visceral, and intense action, as opposed to the methodically surreptitious gameplay that defined the Solid series. Rising is an action title through and through, crafted by some of the most talented and creative designers in the industry. This is a game that's absolutely brimming with minutia and style. However, it's also encumbered by design flaws that truly prevent it from reaching the prominence of hack-and-slash juggernauts like Ninja Gaiden and the original Devil May Cry series. Featuring a robust yet lacking combat system, Rising's mechanics revolve solely around the blade mode and Zandatsu abilities, which allow Raiden to absorb energy from enemies after sundering their bodies with his blade. While a novel concept in and of itself, blade mode and Zandatsu play far too large a role in battle, quickly subverting the varied abilities in Raiden's respectable repertoire of actions and attacks. After sufficient playtime, using blade mode feels very much like an exploit and may quickly become a crutch to less skilled players being overwhelmed by the more aggressive enemies in the second half of the game. On higher difficulties, it's absolutely impossible to play through the campaign without falling back on Zandatsu constantly. Despite how novel the mechanic may be, it should have been balanced more thoroughly in order to give the more interesting aspects of the game mechanics a larger priority throughout. While the game makes sure to give players plenty of tools such as alternate weapons, secondary items, and stealth kills harkening back to the Solid series, none of these elements are fleshed out enough to warrant excessive use beyond context-specific encounters. The lack of on-the-fly weapon switching inhibits experimentation substantially, making the unique weapons feel hollow and mostly inadequate beyond very specific combat scenarios. Even though the unique weapons are lacking in a breadth of attacks to choose from, the combat mechanics themselves feature plenty of depth to be discovered. Attacks can be cancelled into parries, parries can be cancelled into evasions, and vice versa. Blade mode can also be used to cancel attacks, resetting Raiden's position during combos to deal damage more swiftly and sufficiently. Raiden can also learn new attacks and actions by acquiring BP, which is awarded after battles have reached their conclusion. There are plenty of abilities to choose from, however the vast majority of the combat depth is made negligible due to pernicious design oversights such as the erratic camera, lack of audio cues from attacking enemies, and large adversaries who obscure Raiden's position on screen. This effectively forces players down a very linear method with which to dispose of adversaries, i.e. parry, ripper mode, blade mode, then zandatsu ad nauseam. Combat is far too unbalanced to become rewarding outside of boss battles because Raiden is either too vulnerable or too powerful in any given situation. This lack of equanimity detracts substantially from the overall experience, leaving players with little room for experimentation, successfully diluting the gameplay overall. This isn't to say that the gameplay is at all terrible, however it does explicate the fact that most of this title's potential was exhausted through pernicious design oversights. With a few tweaks here and there, the combat in Rising would have easily rivaled some of the greatest hack-and-slash titles that the industry has to offer. As it stands currently, the combat is merely above average, as opposed to being the transcendent masterpiece that it undoubtedly could have been. The persistent camera issues are especially adept at making the vast majority of combat scenarios feel luck-based, especially on higher difficulties. By and large, Metal Gear Rising has one of the most terribly implemented cameras in an action title of recent memory. Often spiraling out of control, it can turn the tide of battle instantly in the favor of your adversaries in spite of your current experience level. The inconsistent lock-on mechanic does very little to ameliorate the pervasive camera issues. Rather than centering enemies, the camera casually keeps them in frame, often swaying around with little regard to who players have attempted to target, leading to unwarranted damage and frustration. Many of the problems that arise due to Rising's capricious camera could have been mollified through simple button reconfiguration and audio cues. If block and parry were their own button, and if enemies gave distinct audio indicators before attacking, battles would have felt far more manageable and fair. Adding insult to injury, when dealt a particularly powerful blow, Raiden will become stunned and can only be invigorated by waggling the analog stick violently. It's absolutely infuriating to watch as your dazed character is pummeled by enemies because the designers felt that mashing the buttons and wiggling the sticks was a viable gameplay mechanic. Nonetheless, despite jarring design oversights, Metal Gear Rising somehow manages to deliver a riveting experience due in large part to its creative and memorable boss encounters. Assuredly the most enjoyable and dynamic aspect of this title, each of the bosses are distinct in look, feel, and procedure, making for some of the most memorable battles that the genre has ever produced. Accentuating the already tense boss encounters is a dynamic and immaculately constructed soundtrack that increases in ferocity as Raiden gains the upper hand in battle. It's a very small yet thoroughly effective addition to the game's presentation, successfully contributing to Rising's distinct identity among not only its own series, but among its contemporaries. While Metal Gear Rising's campaign can be completed in around 5 to 7 hours, players are given plenty of incentive to return to the story mode due to higher difficulties, hidden items, costumes, and swords to unlock. Rising also features a VR training mode consisting of various challenges to complete under specific parameters. However, all in all, the VR training mode feels far too luck-based in many instances and features the most frustrating scenarios found in the entire game. In spite of many quizzical design issues, Rising offers an addictive and satisfying single-player experience that, while abrupt initially, is infinitely replayable. Overall, Metal Gear Rising is a competent hack-and-slash title featuring some of the most unique, imaginative, and visceral gameplay that the genre has ever produced. Displaying astounding set pieces, challenging gameplay, memorable boss battles, and a smooth and consistent frame rate, Metal Gear Rising incises a distinct mark upon the hack-and-slash genre, successfully distinguishing its own brand of gameplay while staying true to the legacy of its source material. Rising is absolutely saturated in a wealth of untapped potential that may very well be able to rival or even surpass some of the most prominent franchises in the genre. However, when taken as a whole, Rising is an intensely fun yet flawed game, very much worthy of your time and money regardless of what it potentially could have been, and because of that I will be awarding Metal Gear Rising Revengeance a 7 out of 10. Even in the midst of some of the most deleterious design flaws, I found myself coming back to this title time and time again due to its addictive, if not somewhat simplistic gameplay. The combat mechanics truly do implicitly communicate something superlative resting just beneath the surface. My only hope is that the inevitable sequel will manage to finally attain the wealth of promise that I know that this series is capable of. With that said, I hope that you all enjoyed my review of Metal Gear Rising Revengeance. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to hear from you all in my next one.
Looking down on the burgeoning sea, the skyscrapers rise, even men with the greatest intentions stop believing their own lies. We can borrow from the future.
Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transformer.